Let's speak now to Dr. Chris Smith, virologist at Cambridge University, the founder of the Naked Science podcast. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Tony.
Chris, where's your gut instinct on this? Interesting, we're told it's serious, but then we don't know. Jonathan Van Tam said that himself today. There's a lot we don't know about Omicron.
Yes, I think it's more fear of what we don't know than what we do at the moment. The evidence we have at the moment is this is a mild condition, but one must be cautious because the data we're relying on comes from South Africa. Not that their science is no good, but that the population they're studying is quite a different population than the UK in terms of demography and age. So many of the cases that they'll have been studying, there are 3,000 or so cases in Gauteng, including Johannesburg. Those are going to be chiefly younger people, although they do report that they've had people of all ages that have been in their samples so far. But they're chiefly younger people. So what we don't know is, while that is reassuring, whether the same trivial illness will apply if a, say, older person in the UK gets it. Then again, their vaccination rates are only about 25%, whereas in the UK, our vaccine uptake in particularly vulnerable older people is more like 95%. So there's a lot of unknowns here. And I think what they're doing is being cautious, but not overcautious. And my instinct is that this is going to be absolutely fine and that the virus is going to respond fine against our vaccines as well in terms of severe disease. So wow. I'm reassured that we know about it. And like Jonathan Van Tam, I'm not panicking at this stage.
That's a lot of people will be comforted by that. Sajid Javid today said in the Commons that immediately, if the Omicron is found to be not as dangerous as the Delta variant, for example, then these new rules will be relaxed. So what will be happening now, Chris? Will the scientists be working on a booster or a vaccine particularly aimed at Omicron, or will they be waiting for more details? Where's the science going now?
When you first discover a new variant of the virus, the way this comes to light is that we have groups all over the world now that as soon as they detect a positive case of coronavirus, they read the genetic code and they line up their read of the genetic code alongside existing genomes of the virus that we know about. And they ask, are these the same? Or are they different? And if they're different, where are they different? And that's how they spotted that there's this particularly mutated form, Omicron, which is what the WHO have dubbed it as a variant of concern. And it's got various changes in various places in the genetic code. And you can then say, well, where are those changes in the genetic code? Which areas of the genetic code are very different? And what do those bits of the genetic code do in the virus? And in this case, those bits of the genetic code for things like the spike on the outer coat of the virus. And that spike matters because that's how the virus gets into our cells in the first place. But equally, it's what we've used to make vaccines to stop the virus getting into our cells because it's the linchpin in the infection. So if it changes that spike too much, it's possible that it may, as one person put it, swerve round the protection conferred by our vaccines. On the other hand, if we have a high enough level of antibody washing around in the bloodstream, despite the slight change in shape of the spike, you're substituting quantity for quality. So you can still outcompete the virus if you just have enormously high levels of antibody. And that is why the government's emphasis has shifted onto accelerating the booster program to push up the amount of antibody in the average person's bloodstream. And that's not a bad thing to do anyway, because as Chris Whitty reminded us last week, the big threat still remains Delta, which is accounting for the majority of the cases in this country. We've only had a handful of cases of this Omicron variant. Yeah. But if we push up the levels of antibody, we'll help everybody to push down the levels of Delta anyway. So these measures are not a bad thing, whatever happens.
We've got plenty of questions from listeners, myself and the Quasar, which we're going to put to you in a sec, Chris. But just on that, because you've just mentioned that, I read today an article saying that actually one unintended good consequence of Omicron is that it could overtake Delta. It could push Delta to one side. It could dominate Delta.
Well, it's a bit of an academic point at the moment, but one speculation is, well, if you've got something which is more transmissible and can outcompete. So if it was like two cars in a race, here comes a Jonathan Van Tam moment. If you've got two cars in a race and one's got a bigger engine and it goes a bit faster, it's going to win in the race and it will get ahead of the other car. If the Omicron variant outcompetes Delta, it will start to account for the majority of the cases we see, and it will leave in its wake people who are immune. But if it's more mild as an infection than the Delta agent is, then it will leave behind immune people who've been only trivially infected and affected which means there's nothing for Delta to infect, so it will fizzle out, and therefore the more severe form of the virus will shuffle off. Now, that's obviously an attractive hypothesis, but it's just that, a hypothesis, and it is not a replacement for actually proper real-world data, epidemiology, and the biology. And you asked, well, what other experiments are scientists going to be doing now? The key experiment they're doing now is growing this virus in a laboratory, in cells, and they'll throw onto it antibodies collected from the bloodstreams of people who've either been infected with Delta or been vaccinated or both. And the question they'll be asking is, do the antibodies in the bloodstream of a recently or past vaccinated person stop this virus from growing? And if the answer is yes, that gives us all enormous reassurance.
Makes absolute sense. So the message from Anthony Fauci today in the US was don't panic, and I think you've embodied that, which is great, Chris, because we often, it's nice to be able to reassure people when we see these headlines. Look, enough of me. Let's have some questions from listeners. Here's Graham. Actually, he's left a message on our WhatsApp number, which I'll give everyone again, because you can leave voice notes now, which is great. We can actually hear the listeners. 08085 909 693. So here's Graham's question.
So I've just been on the NHS website, and there's a really long queue for booking booster jabs. I just wonder whether there's any information about the coverage and how much the booster jabs makes a difference to immunity and to rates of illness, and whether people should be panicking if they haven't got their booster jab now, and they're in a queue and waiting for one. As I say, I think there might be a sort of little bit of panic really about the booster jabs, about not being covered if you've only had two. So it'd be useful to get some sense of the efficacy of the first two jabs, and how much the booster jabs makes a difference.
Yeah, so Chris, booster anxiety, mine's not till mid-December, and I've thought, could I get an earlier one? So where are we on that?
Well, first point is, if you haven't had a booster, it doesn't actually make a huge amount of difference if you are a younger person, because younger people have very good immunity, like 95% protection for months. The people who are more at risk are older people, because the trend that has emerged is that the longer that elapses since vaccination, the lower the level of antibody you have, and the rate at which you lose that antibody is greater the older you are. But because the booster program has so far prioritized the oldest people who were also the first vaccinated, we've restored very good protection. And the data we have on the use of the Pfizer vaccine for boosting people is that it restores people to 95% protection. We think that the most vulnerable people who have received their booster, and there are now more than 17 million of them, that they've been well protected. The likely outcome will be that if younger people then get their booster, they're going to be equivalently well protected, but they're already pretty well protected is really the message here. So younger people will benefit by being boosted because their protection will last for longer, but they've already got good underlying protection. And this was underlined at the Downing Street press briefing today, where this point was made again, that younger people are good responders to the vaccine and tend to hang on to their immunity for longer.
Chris, thank you very much. So now we've got a couple of minutes. So we're going to, myself and the Quasar are here. We're going to go for some quick fire questions from listeners on the text.
Hiya, Chris. Hello again. I spoke to you on Saturday. We had a little chat, didn't we? Yeah. Okay. Boosters. We get lots of questions on boosters. So a really quick yes or no. Lizzie, very similar to what you've just been asked. Lizzie's in Buckinghamshire. She says, my whole family and I have just had COVID, despite being double jabbed. They had the Oxford vaccine in June. Husband and I were quite poorly. Do we still need the booster?
Well, the answer is yes, you should definitely get the booster, because what we know is that with time, antibody levels fall. Natural infection doesn't tend to produce as higher antibody response as having the vaccine. I know that sounds contradictory and a bit bizarre, but it's a fact that the vaccines produce a really high level of antibody response, and therefore will give you a reinforcement of the defense you'll have from having caught the infection. So either way, getting a booster is a good idea.
Gemma in Kent very quickly says, I'm due to go to a gig on Friday, 250 people. It's a small indoor space. No requirement for mass or social distancing. I've got 2 children at school that has confirmed cases. We're all showing negative on lateral flow. Should I still go? This is just about behavioural change.
Well, as you correctly surmised, lots of young people are catching this at the moment, and we think that about 3/4 of school children in certain age groups have already had it. You're doing all the right things, though, by having a test And if you have any symptoms, of course, you should A, get a test, but B, perhaps consider not going to your gig. But if you're feeling well and you have a negative test, you've taken all reasonable steps in order to protect yourself and other people. And if you've had 2 vaccines on top of that, then you've really gone as far as you can to keep everybody and yourself safe.
Yeah, OK, one more.
Oh, yeah, very quick one. I've had 2 doses of the Johnson & Johnson jab as part of a trial. Single-dose treatment, so effectively, I've had the booster, but J&J jab has barely been mentioned since it was approved in the UK. It's up to me if I get a booster or not, but would Dr. Chris recommend that I should? You see, it's all about boosters.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend that you do, because going back to what was said at the press briefing this afternoon, they underline the fact that the higher your level of antibody, the better defended you are. Everybody's level of antibody does fall a bit with time, more pronounced among older people, and therefore the best way to maintain the best protection is to keep the antibody level as high as possible. And so regardless of whatever vaccine you had in your primary course, then getting a booster at the appointed time is a really good idea, and I would say you should go for it.
Listen, Chris, our time has run out. It sounds like you were on telly with LaQuaza the other day. You're on with Colin Murray tonight. Do you ever get any sleep?
No, I cloned myself. That was my big scientific breakthrough. I'm just waiting for my Nobel Prize, and that means I can be on every channel, on every radio station and television station all over the world, answering questions all at the same time. But if you believe that, you'll believe anything.
5 Live's very own Dolly the sheep. Cheers, Chris.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you very much indeed. That's Dr. Chris Smith. So he will be with Colin Murray, always is on a Monday. So they'll be talking, plenty more questions, I'm sure, by then that people want to ask. So that's from 10:30 here tonight on 5 Live.